Let's do a few sample problems with the use of dimensional analysis. The average person has 100,000 hairs on their head. According to the American Academy of Dermatology, 50 to 100 hairs are lost each day. So for these questions, let's assume 50 hairs are lost per day and no new hairs grow back to make things a little bit easier to calculate. The first thing that I would do if I were to look at this, if I see number of hairs per day, okay, so number of hairs lost per day, what I would do is I would then make that into a conversion factor. Okay, so I make that into a conversion factor as in I put 50 hairs maybe in the numerator, and then when it says per day, I would do a fraction and write 1 day at the bottom. And then if I were to do eventually other problems with dimensional analysis, I could also take the reciprocal of that. So let's try with number 1. How many hairs are lost per hour? You could solve these a whole bunch of different ways. So I'll show you 2 different ways, one with kind of example 1 from the previous video, and then one with example 2. So if I were to do with example 1, I would start off with not a fraction. I'm going to write 1 hour, right? Because when they're asking about how many hairs are lost per hour, they're talking about how many hairs would you lose in 1 hour. So I start off with 1 hour, I do a multiplication sign, I do a fraction, and then I want my units to cancel out. So if I'm looking at my units to cancel out, I want hours to cancel out with hours, so I'm going to write hours in the denominator. And then if I'm looking at my setup here, or what I have done, I have 50 hairs per day, which doesn't help me just yet. So I know my hours cancels out with hours, but I can't use this 50 hairs per day yet because I don't have, if we're looking at hours is a measure of time, day is another measure of time. I have to somehow get hours to be converted into days. And hopefully you know that. So if I have 1 day, and I asked you how many hours is that, you would say 24. So right now, if I'm looking at units, my hours will cancel out with my hours, and I'm left with days. And if I want to get rid of days using dimensional analysis, I can, because I could put day on the bottom. And then now here, looking at this conversion factor, I could put 50 hairs at the top. So for every 1 day, I lose 50 hairs. And then now I'm done with what's called the setup. So if I'm looking at the setup, hours cancels out with hours, days cancels out with days, and then I'm just left with the numbers. Okay? So if I'm left with the numbers, I'll take 1 divided by 24, because 24 is in the denominator, and then I'll multiply that by 50. Or what you could do if you're just looking at this as an entity, you could do 50 divided by 24. That works as well. So however you decide to solve the math, we'll get the same answer. So you get 2.08. And this is without significant figures. Right? So with significant figures, if I'm looking at this, per hour doesn't have any sig figs. This conversion factor, so I'm going to go infinite number of sig figs here. The 24 hours in a day, that's infinite number of sig figs. But this one has 1 sig fig. It has 1 sig fig because of the number 5. So we always want to keep the least number of sig figs. So we would see if we have to round up, which we do not. So my final answer, keeping 1 sig fig, would be 2. So for every hour, you lose 2 hairs on average. All right, so you could do 2 hairs per, maybe even do a /hour per hour, so we know. Or you could just leave it as 2 hairs. If you wanted to set it up the other way when you start off with a fraction, let me write it over here. So I'll start off with a fraction. What you could do is you could start off with your 50 hairs per day, per 1 day. And then you could like reverse cancel. So you could put day on the top here. So I know that days would cancel out with days. And then for every 1 day, there are 24 hours. And then if I'm looking at my units, I'm left with hairs per hour, which is what they want me to solve for anyway. So it works out either way. You'll get the same answer because if you look at the numbers, the math is still the same. So we'll go hair, and I'll do a /hour. And then I'll have you box your final answer to make it easier to grade. For the second question, Second question, what is the percent change after an hour? So for percent change, if I were to write the formula, percent change is equal to we'll go with like absolute value of your final value minus your initial value divided by your initial value. So if I were to look at this particular question, and then I want to make it a percentage. So then you have to multiply by 100. So if I were to look at my data here, my initial value is how much hair I have at the beginning. And how much hair I have at the beginning is in the question prompt. It's 100,000. So I'll put 100,000 at the bottom. So that's how many hairs. And then I would put my final minus my initial. So my final number of hairs, if I'm thinking about this after 1 hour, right? So after 1 hour, I lose 2 hairs, right? Per hour, 2 hairs. So after 1 hour, I would do 100,000. I'll put this in a different color. So my final would be 100,000 minus 2, which is 99,998 hairs. I would put that number in here. 998. So that's my final number of hairs I have because I lost 2 after 1 hour. Subtract my initial, which is 100,000. Take the absolute value of that, multiply by 100, and then you should get 0.002%. So it doesn't seem like much, 0.002%. And this is with one significant figure. And just to review, so this is one significant figure. Before the AP test, they don't really care too much about significant figures. Maybe just don't go to so many decimal places. Okay, then the last question is, what is the percent change after 1 month? So after 1 month, you could solve this a variety of ways. You could kind of think about question number 1 and then consider that question as how many hairs are lost per month, where maybe you're going from days to months or months to days, like something with the number 30 in there. Or what you could do is you could take this percent change and then just multiply it by a certain factor to get to months. So in terms of what I would do is I would probably, I would maybe start off with my percentage. So I would do 0.002%. And I know that this is in 1 hour. And so I just kind of made a new conversion factor. I took my answer from question number 2, because this is 0.002% in 1 hour. So I put the 1 hour in the denominator. Then I could do like reverse canceling. So I could say, okay, I want to get rid of hours. And I know that I want to maybe get to days first. I want to get to days, because if I can get to days, then can get me to months. And then I fill out the numbers. I say 1 day has 24 hours, and then 1 month will go with 30 days. And it says 30 days. And then if I look at my units, canceling out units, hours canceled out with hours, days canceled out with days, and I'm left with percentage per month. So then in my calculator, I didn't do that yet. So 0.0202 times 24 times 30 gets me 1.44% change, but then I also want to do significant figures, and it looks like I should have 1 sig fig because of the number 0.002 that has 1 sig fig. This one has infinite, this one has infinite, so I should just have 1 sig fig, and I do not need to round up. So my final answer would be 1% change per month. So after 1 month, if no hairs grow back, I lose 1% of my hair. And that's it for the examples. Thanks for listening.